Hello, and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. My name is Audrey Monkey, and I am your host. Here on the podcast and at my website at sunshine-parenting.com, I research, write, speak, and interview guests on the topics of summer camp, parenting, and happiness. I share stories, ideas, and tips to help parents and anyone else who works with young people raise competent, kind, optimistic kids. I believe that together we can raise a generation of happy, connected kids who bring positive changes to the world. In this episode of the podcast, I'm talking with Maria Horner. She is the longtime owner and director of Catalina Island Camps and a dear friend of mine who has fabulous training resources for counselors and parents. This is Jedi Mom Tricks Part 2 with Maria Horner. Enjoy. Hi, Maria. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Audrey.
I'm so excited to talk with you again. Your Jedi Mom Tricks was one of my most popular podcast episodes so far.
That cracks me up.
So this is going to be part 2 of Maria Horner's Jedi Mom Tricks. But before we get started, my husband was telling me the other day that most people don't understand what camp directors do and why you and I, who are both summer camp directors, have any knowledge about parenting or anything else. So I thought we'd just start today, just take a minute and talk about how long you've been a camp director, a little bit of your history, and some of the things that you've learned more about over the years and with your involvement with both camp and schools, etc.
Sure. So I started I started working at camp when I was in college, and then started directing right after I graduated. And so this will be my 34th summer at camp, which kind of blows me away because I don't feel like I'm old enough to have been someplace for 34 years. Like when I write that number down, it sort of freaks me out. But I think the thing, there are two things that I think have given me the knowledge, or I don't know if you'd call it that, whatever, the experience that I have. And one is just years, right? So as camp directors, we have the opportunity to work with all different kinds of kids. So I only have one child, so I've only parented one kid, one very specific kind of child. But I've had the opportunity over 34 years to work with thousands of really different kinds of kids. So I've been able to learn that when technique number 1 doesn't work with camper A, I have techniques number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that I've had the opportunity to try on all different kinds of campers over the years. And so I sort of joke sometimes with camper parents who I'm good friends with, that I've honed my parenting skills on your children. I also think one of the great things about being involved in the camping profession is there's a lot of professional development opportunities out there for us. So you and I both have opportunities to go to conferences every year, multiple conferences. We just came back last month. Tom and I went with 3 of our directors to the Tri-State Camp Conference in Atlantic City, and it's the largest camp conference in the world. There's like 3,000 people that go. It's hosted by the New York, New Jersey affiliate office of the American Camp Association, and because of the size of it, the kinds of speakers that they're able to attract. Billie Jean King was our closing keynote speaker, and she was phenomenal. If you've never heard her speak before, find a TED Talk or a podcast or something. She's really inspiring and amazing. But so we have the opportunity to hear from all different kinds of people, both inspirational people like her, but then people who have done a ton of research and work in the field of youth development and, things like mindfulness and behavior management and brain science. It amazes me how much I've been exposed to, how much I've been able to learn through those kinds of experiences that other parents don't. I know what a yes brain is. You know what a yes brain is, but
right.
You know what that is.
Right.
We've also had the opportunity to be exposed to all kinds of books and articles and literature about child development, and then had the opportunities after reading those kinds of things to sit down with colleagues and peers and talk about them and how they work and how they apply. And I think that really provides a great deal of development, at least for me.
Well, and of course, I think you and I are a lot alike, and that's why we're friends. We get together and we talk about these books that we're reading and speakers that we've heard and different resources. So, I mean, I think not every summer camp director is like you and me and has been doing this for 3 decades and learning, learning all these things. But I think just before, this is why I wanted to just establish before we go on with your Jedi Mom tricks, why you are an expert in these parenting and behavior management things. And I think sometimes we hesitate as camp directors to call ourselves experts in this field. But as you mentioned, compared to lay people and parents who just are parenting their own family, we have a lot of experience, like you said. And I bet, like me, you've had the opportunity to research different issues a lot over the years. So as you see a camper come through or a trend with your campers and are figuring out ways to have your counselors help with that, kids or a certain situation, we end up learning about a lot of different things. And so, it's literally been thousands of kids that you and I have worked with over the years and their parents.
Absolutely. And it's so true. You learn about these things and then you have the immediate opportunity to test them out and see what works and what doesn't.
Right.
Instead of, again, if you only have a 1 or 2 kids and you read something and learn about it, that situation might not occur in your family for, 6 months or if ever. But when you all of a sudden have a whole camp full of kids, the chances of that kind of thing presenting itself increases dramatically. And practice is what makes us better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So hopefully anyone who's still listening to our podcast now realizes that you are an expert. And in case they missed your last one, which I will definitely put a link in the show notes from this episode, this is Maria Horner talking about Jedi Mom Tricks Part 2. And just as a little bit of a recap, these are specific tips that Maria trains her counselors in each summer. We covered 4 in our first episode. We're going to cover 4 more today. And then in part 3, we'll do yet another 4, all totaling up to 12 amazing, mind-blowing Jedi Mom tricks that will help parents parent better. So, are you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
Okay, why don't you share your first Jedi Mom trick for today?
Okay, so the 4 that I picked for today really cluster around your work with your partner, whether that's your spouse or your co-counselor in a cabin. So the first one is really about communicating with your partner. So when I was pregnant with Nick, Tom and I talked a lot about what we wanted for our child. And through months of conversation, it became obvious that what was important to us was that he was a kind, compassionate, loving person. And the corollary to that was we had conversations about how it didn't matter to us if he was the smartest kid in the class or the most talented or the best athlete. At the end of the day, what was important to us was that he was nice. And so when Nick was little, we used to say to him, what's the most important thing in the Horner family? And with his little boy voice, he would say, be nice. And so, yeah, it was super cute. It's still kind of cute. Not as much though. 21-year-olds are nowhere near as cute as 3-year-olds, but whatever. So we talk a lot about that with our staff. Our staff work in partnership with, there's a cabin counselor and a specialist, and the communication between the two of them is critical. Taking time every day, even if it's only 5 or 10 or 15 minutes when the kids aren't around, to talk about what went on today, what worked well, what did you struggle with, where can I help you, what help do I need from you. That's really critical, because if you're not on the same page with whoever you're parenting or working with in leading a group of kids, all kinds of things can go wrong. And for Tom and I, having that sort of baseline of we just want him to be a good person, that really helped us if he came home with a less than stellar grade or something happened. We could go back to, at the end of the day, we have a really nice kid. And I will say, as you know, my mother-in-law lived with Alzheimer's for a number of years before she passed away about a year ago. And watching Nick with his grandmother was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And there would be times when I would get so frustrated with his inability to keep his room clean or keep his schoolwork organized or whatever. And all we needed to do was go have lunch or dinner with grandma, and I could watch him interact so kindly and lovingly with his grandmother, who was asking the same series of questions over and over and over again, and he would patiently answer them while holding her hand. It was like, okay, check. We've reached, our goal has been, I don't know if succeeded, but like we've really, that message getting through and being consistent really helps. So I think that's important for cabin counselors as well, right? Like you have to know what's important and what's not.
And also
everything can't be important.
Exactly. And I think the other part of that is just there can be resentment if one person feels like they're the one always laying down the law about, like, you mentioned cleaning room or homework or whatever. If you feel like you're always the one having to do kind of the nagging, negative stuff, and then there's the other parent who's like the fun one, which obviously we have our different personalities, but I think with camp counselors, I see the same thing. We really have to be clear and make sure they talk about those things. And if one person likes to be the person who supervises the kids getting ready or packing or whatever, that's fine. But there needs to be communication that, okay, so now what are you going to do? What am I going to do? So that everyone feels like it's balanced and somewhat fair, even if you're doing different things. And I think parents often don't talk about that. They might say, I remember a friend of mine was talking the other day. She said, yeah, when my kids were little, I'd always be in the kitchen, like doing up the dishes while my husband was playing with them and having fun with them. Yeah. And I was like feeling like, wait, I want to go have fun with them. So those are the kinds of things that you'd need to really talk about. So I love that you guys were so intentional about figuring out your goals and what you were looking at. You could just keep going back to that if you occasionally one or the other kind of strayed from the original goal.
Right. Well, and I think it's important, and this is something I tell my counselors about all the time, is that, as parents, your day gets really, really busy and you're tired. And so taking that time to connect with who your partner is can sometimes be the last thing on your list, and it can be the thing that you scratch off or just never get to. And being able to take time each day, obviously, is what we encourage our staff to do. But, as two parents working together, just taking some time to say, what's going on with you? How is this parenting gig working out for you so far? What's been hard? What's not? I just think it's really, what kinds of things did Nick ask you to do today that you had to say no to? We didn't get mommy daddied very much, mostly because he learned at an early age that wasn't going to fly in our house. But still checking in regularly, I think, is really important.
I think that's important. That's such an amazing tip, and I think something that will be really helpful to people. So good one. So we'll call that's Jedi Mom trick, actually number 5, because 1 through 4. Right. Okay.
So the next one flows absolutely from that in part of those conversations, you have to determine which battles you're willing to fight, right? And we tell our staff this all the time, right? You have to pick your battles. So the example that I always use with my staff about this was that Nick was an extremely picky eater as a child. I mean, there was a period of time where he basically ate grilled cheese sandwiches, macaroni and cheese quesadillas, and the occasional pasta with just cheese sprinkled on the top. I mean, he basically ate carbs with cheese. Like, those were the things that he ate. And it didn't bother me. And like Tom and I talked about it, and, his pediatrician, I mean, my child is big. Like, his growth was not stunted by poor eating habits, between the ages of 3 and 10. And he took a vitamin. He went to the pediatrician. He was healthy. Everything was fine. And we just decided that food was not a battle that we were going to have. When we made dinner at night, if what we were having wasn't something that we thought he was going to eat, instead of having a battle at the dinner table, we made a cheese quesadilla for him in the microwave, or a grilled cheese sandwich on the panini press. Like, whatever, we didn't care. Now, it drove my parents and my in-laws crazy because, our houses growing up as kids were what's prepared, you eat, right? We were okay with what we did. That food thing was not a battle that we wanted to fight. And we were both on the same page about it. So when somebody else gave us a hard time about it, we were able to just smile and say, yeah, that's just not something that we worry about in our house. And the same thing was true for sleep. Like, he was a horrible sleeper until, we joke, he got a magic bed when he was 4.5, maybe 5.5. I can't remember which Christmas it was. But up until that point, every night between about 4 o'clock and 5:30 in the morning, he would wake up and he would come and get into bed with us and finish the rest of the night there. And we just decided that we didn't care. Like, we just didn't care. And for Christmas that year, he really wanted one of those lofted beds with a slide and a little fort underneath. And we said, oh, gosh, that's a big boy bed. And kids who sleep in beds like that don't get in bed with mommy and daddy in the morning. And he was insistent that he was ready for it. So we got it for him, and we put it together on Christmas Eve while he was not at home. And of course, he slept with us Christmas Eve, woke up the next morning, and the bed that was his present, right? There was a big bow on his door. And I will tell you, he never once got out of bed in the middle of the night after we got him the magic bed. But anyway, those were battles that we chose to fight, or chose not to fight, actually. But I will tell you, even though he couldn't spend the whole night in his own bed, and he only ate 4 foods, and they all had cheese in them, he was very rarely rude to other people. He was not mean. He was not, and any time that he was, those were the things that everything stopped, and we sat down and talked about it, because those were non-negotiables in our house. Like, you do not sass grandpa. That's just not what we do. And if you do it, because you're a kid and we're going to stop what's happening, and we're going to redirect that behavior. But if you want to have a grilled cheese sandwich instead of whatever's being served at the dinner table, that's okay. We talk a lot with our counselors about that too, because they don't have the benefit of having fallen in love and chosen each other as lifelong mates to raise children with, right? Mm-hmm. We like to sort of put them together and say, here are 8 kids that were raised up until this point by other people. Now you get to take care of them. But the importance of them sitting down and talking about, okay, what's important to us? Like, is a clean cabin really important? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. And we always tell our staff, it doesn't matter. Like, the answer to that question doesn't matter as long as you both have the same answer.
Right. Well, and I really like how you said it, because some parents might listen to this might say, well, wait, sleep is really important to me, or food, but it's not, that's not the question. The question is, you don't want the strife of your parenting partner to be disagreeing about things. So like you said, the important thing is just deciding, where are we on this? And let's just be a united front with our kids. So whatever we decide, and even if there are things that you disagree on, figuring out what you're going to land on so that that's what's communicated to the kids. So I love that. And even if the counselors decide, well, our cabin's not going to win Clean Cabin Award because it's just not that important to us, that's okay. That's their decision to kind of make together. But if one person is really messy and the other one's neat, and the neat one is, really upset because they want to win cabin inspection, they need to talk about that. Just like parents need to talk about, if food is really important to one parent and it's just something super important what the kids eat, then, maybe you need to agree that parent's going to be in charge of that, but you're not, or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, again, whatever it is, you're absolutely right. Like, the issues themselves are not the point. The point is that you decide as a family what's important. And I know we talked about this last time, but everything can't be important. Like, every single thing you can't feel like every single thing has to be done perfectly. You have to pick a few that are in alignment with your family's values, and then really, really be consistent with them. And the messages that you send to your kids, both intentionally and sort of unconsciously, have to be in line with that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great one. Okay, what is next?
So the next one I call consequences versus threats. And when Nick, or this has happened many times in his life, but I can't remember, he's like 9 or 10 years old. He did something, I don't remember what it was. And we sat down, as we did, like, we stopped what was happening and we sat down to kind of work through it. And after about 15 minutes of conversation, he just rolled his eyes and he said, Mom, I really just wish you were like other parents. And like, when I got in trouble, you'd either just like spank me or take away my phone, and then we could move on to whatever's next. Why do we always have to talk these things through? And then when he got, right? That's what happens when you have 2 camp directors as parents. Like, we talk about stuff. And then when he got a little bit older, I think he was actually in high school, he, again, did something. He was not a perfect child by any stretch of the imagination, and we took away his phone for whatever the period of time was, as had been determined. Like, if this happens, here's the consequence. And he said to me, Mom, I really wish you were like, and I'm not going to say the name of this child, but this other boy's parents, because they threaten to take his phone away all the time, but they never do. And so we had a long talk about the difference between consequences and threats, and made it really clear that in our family, we don't threaten things. Like, there are no threats in our house. However, if we say, if you do X, then Y will happen, you can bet your sweet bippy that every time X happens, Y is going to follow. And so we talk with our counselors about that a lot, because especially as a 19 or 20-year-old who doesn't have a lot of experience working with groups of kids, threats come really easily, right? Like, if you don't pick your stuff up, then you're not going to get to go water skiing, or if you don't do this, then that's not going to happen. You're not going to get dessert today, whatever. And they're things that you actually can't do, right? Like, you can't take away a program activity from a kid because they didn't pick up their dirty socks. Like, that's not how we do things. And so we have to help counselors see that if you want there to be consequences for behavior, we have to talk about what that looks like. And then you have to be consistent, both you and your co-counselor, in applying those consequences.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. And I was thinking, I had a parent once call me about a situation where she wanted to know, well, basically she had threatened something that she really didn't want to follow through on.
Mm-hmm.
And so the threat was not to go to a family event that was like an annual family party event that she really wanted to go to. And so her question for me is, I told my son that he wasn't going to get to go to this if he didn't do X or whatever. And so and then she was struggling because she wanted to go still. And that was another example. I think oftentimes parents do too big of threats almost, like, or whatever. Also, before you say the consequence, are you really going to follow through? If you say to your child, if you, are rude to grandma and grandpa, we're leaving the family party. Are you really going to follow through on that without a warning? Or you have to say the consequence is going to be something you actually are going to do. Right. So I think that's really important. And as you and I, we have been fortunate to be camp directors with our kids. I think our kids know that what we say is really going to happen, which, and I think that's pretty important as a parent too. And I think you can get yourself into a pickle when you kind of threaten things, but don't follow through, or then give a warning or change the consequence or whatever. It's very confusing to kids. And of course, they're just going to keep testing at that point.
Mm-hmm. Another sort of example, it's kind of in line with this, is I remember when I was in high school, I didn't really, this is always kind of funny, I didn't really like kids. The only kids I ever babysat were my cousins because my mom made me. Like, I just didn't. I mean, I still think it's funny that I ended up in the career that I did. But I can remember being at my aunt's house and talking with her in one room of the house. And the kids she had 3 kids, and they were in another room. And she called out to them to do something. I don't even remember what it was. And they didn't. And she called out again, a little bit louder, and they didn't do it. And then she stood up and she yelled, and they finally did it. And she was super frustrated. I don't know why I always have to yell to get them to do what I want them to do. And I remember thinking, I wonder how often she doesn't get to that third point. Like, she doesn't get to the yelling. So the kids know, I don't actually have to listen to what she's saying until her voice gets that certain edge to it. Because up until then, she might drop it, right? She might decide, I don't really want him to take out the trash, or I don't really want her, to put her books away, and they get to keep doing what they're doing. And so that was a really powerful lesson for me at a relatively young age, that that piece of consistency is really important. Nick had his 3rd grade teacher I loved. He was a first-year teacher. He was a young man, and he was a phenomenal teacher. I mean, my kid loved going to school every day, but he wasn't the most consistent. Like, he said, this is what he needed you to do in order to get this kind of grade on an assignment. But sometimes if you're the header wasn't exactly right. He let it fly. Sometimes he didn't, whatever. When Nick was in 4th grade, his teacher was uber consistent. And Nick would get angry when he would get points taken off because he wrote Nick H instead of Nick Horner, or he didn't write the date out correctly. And he would get so mad. And I said, well, but stop for just a minute. Did Mrs. Edwards tell you how she wanted it to be? And he'd say, yeah. I was like, did you understand what she was asking for? Yeah. And you didn't do it. Well, no. But she took points off. I was like, so she did what she said she was going to do, but you didn't do what you were supposed to do. So let's talk about why you're upset and like why you're calling her mean. She's not mean. She's being a person of integrity, right? Like she's doing what she said she was going to do. But I think kids will always roll those dice every single time. If they can get away with it once, then they'll keep trying.
And side note, Nick Horner in 4th grade, I bet he started writing his whole name because he didn't want to have another 10-minute conversation with his mom without following through on. I'm sure after that long conversation, he was like, okay, I'm just going to write my name and follow the instructions so I don't have to deal with this.
Anything to have another conversation with my mother about my behavior around this issue.
That's so funny. Okay, so we're up to our final Jedi Mom trick for today. So what do you have?
Great. So this is actually a relatively new one, but I thought it fit with these other 3 really perfectly. We've talked a lot about non-negotiables, but the importance of there only being a few that are really non-negotiable. So that means, if you follow that logic, there are a lot of things that are negotiable, right? And so what does that look like? And so I can't take credit for this idea. I read it in an article or a book somewhere. I wish I was better at remembering where I read things, about a mom who had 3 or 4 kids. And every year on each child's birthday, she would take them out for a special lunch. And they would sort of review the year. And one of the things that they would talk about is, okay, you're another year older now. What are some things that you'd like to be able to do that you haven't been able to do up until this point? And so I read that article. Nick was probably a freshman in high school. So we started doing that at the beginning of every school year, because to me that just felt like a better transition time. Plus his birthday's in the middle of the summer. So going out for a nice lunch means eating chili dogs in the dining hall, right? So not a lot of privacy for a conversation. And we had those conversations and we're able to talk about, okay, let's look at the last year. Let's talk about the things that were really successful. Let's talk about the places that things were maybe a little bit hard. And now let's talk about what are some of the things, some of the rules or the parameters that you've had to live within that you'd like to, now that you're a year older and have another year of just kind of proving that you're a responsible young man, things that you'd like to do. And those were really great conversations. Now, again, they probably would have been more successful with a kid who was pushing a little bit more, because there weren't a lot of things that he wanted to be able to do that he wasn't allowed to do. But I can imagine kids who want to be able to have a later curfew or want to be able to drive farther than the 5 miles within their city limits or whatever, that having those conversations at really calm sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just non-involved times. Like you're not arguing about curfew for tonight. Mm-hmm. You're sort of planning for the year ahead. And you're telling your kids that when there are rules or things that you have to follow in our house that you want to talk about, this is the time and this is the way to talk about them, calmly and rationally when they're not in your face, right? Because I think that's what happens too often. I mean, I think curfew is an easy one, even though it wasn't a big point of struggle in our house. I know it is for a lot of families. You have those conversations about curfew, not at a calm, rational moment, but when your kid's walking out the door and wants to stay out an extra hour. Well, that doesn't really lead anywhere well. So I think that's just something I wish I would have learned earlier, because I think it would be a great thing to put in place with a younger child. Just this understanding of there's just going to be this annual event where we're going to sit down and we're going to kind of talk about what are some things that you'd like to be able to do now that you're a year older. As adults, we're recognizing, hey, you're a year older and you're more responsible. And then the really important piece to that is that with those additional sort of freedoms comes some accountability, right? So what additional responsibilities are you going to take on now that you're a year older?
Mm-hmm.
Can I stop having to check your homework every night? Can I stop having to ask you to clean your room because you're just going to do it on your own? What are those things? And again, they're going to be different for every family, but I just really like the idea of making that an annual sit-down sort of special occasion with each child.
That is such a terrific idea. I think we're going to start doing that because we have not been doing that, but we've had these conversations. But I've always said, like, to me, when a kid starts driving, that's a point in our family where if you're going to be driving a family car, you will have the responsibility of, you might be driving siblings to and from school, stopping at the market to do errands, helping with some cooking. So like along with the kind of freedom of getting to drive also comes the responsibility of helping with like family errands and driving. So that's really great. Okay. Well, these have been so good once again, Maria. Just one final thing. We have one more minute we can use. So are there any really cool parenting books or leadership books or anything that you're reading now that you would recommend to people?
So I have to tell you, as you know, we're Skyping from my hotel room and I had to use my phone instead of my computer. So my phone is currently propped up on the book that I'm reading right now, which is The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Oh, love that book.
And so I've actually had the book for a long time and tried to start reading it and didn't have any success. But I had a recent long car drive last weekend, so I downloaded it on Audible, listened to 2 hours on the way up, 2 hours on the way back, brought the book with me because I need to go through and highlight some things, because I think absolutely from a camp director's perspective, there are things in there. But I'm looking at it now as a parent thinking, oh, there were all of these things that I could have done as a mom that would have been so impactful. So it's an easy read. The Audible is super fun to listen to, although I have to say there's some really inspirational stories in there. So I'm driving and crying a little bit, which is somewhat embarrassing and maybe unsafe. But it's a great book.
Oh my gosh, that's a terrific recommendation. One I love as well, and I've posted about it, but I will for sure put links in that. Okay, Maria, this has been so great. Thanks for joining me for Jedi Mom Tricks Part 2. We will do it again soon.
Thanks, Audrey. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I loved chatting with Maria again about more of her Jedi Mom tricks. You can find notes about what we talked about, as well as links to Catalina Island camps and other resources we discussed on my website at sunshine-parenting.com. I'd also like to ask you a favor. If you are one of my regular listeners and you are enjoying this podcast, would you take just a few minutes and go write a review and give a rating to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast on iTunes? That would be really great, and I would appreciate it. I am going to be doing giveaways of some fun parenting packs to at least 5 of the people who write a review for me over there. So take some time to do that if you're enjoying this podcast. So I'm going to end this episode with a little quote from The Power of Moments that we talked about. It's by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. Moments matter, and what an opportunity we miss when we leave them to chance. Teachers can inspire, caregivers can comfort, service workers can delight, politicians can unite, and managers can motivate. All it takes is a bit of insight and forethought. This is a book about the power of moments and the wisdom of shaping them.